Yes.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Good to see
I
you.
look for their names in the PowerPoint.
Let's chat for a moment afterwards because it's. I wonder if it's worth a little informal meeting. You know, I'm not interested.
Oh, here, I have something that right back there. Fancy. Sorry.
All right, 2 o'clock, it is 2 o'clock. We do have light. I'm wondering if we were gonna do this in the dark today. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and call our town council meeting to order. If everybody would join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, first order of business is the approval of the minutes of our last 2 town council meetings. So first, I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the town council meeting for November 5th, 2019. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second? All right, before we go, we have everybody here today except Dan is away?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Let's go ahead.
I assume everybody can see Dan's not here, but I thought I would at least acknowledge that we were missing one of our council members. Any changes, comments?
No.
No, Mayor.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, and second, we have the minutes of our December 3rd, 2019 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Any changes, comments?
No.
All in
No.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, mayor's update. I've just got a couple things. Obviously, I want to welcome everybody back from the holidays. I hope everybody had a good holiday and new year. Just for the council, a couple reminders, things I want to mention. As a reminder, we have our annual council retreat coming up this month. That is scheduled for the 29th and the 30th. Stephanie, we're holding it here in the meeting room side of the meeting, which is something which the council does every year, either late January, early February. Stephanie and I are still working on the agenda, but I think our target is to have this out to, at least a draft out to the council members by the end of this week. And like previous years, it's scheduled for the afternoon of the first day and in the morning of the second day. Second item, I just want to do a quick update, and maybe Stephanie Tillerson in her comments may have additional information on this, but at our last December meeting, we were still adding up our storm costs from Dorian. And at least as of, I think, you still, the last time I talked to you, had a few more, or at least another receipt, but right now we're at about $675,000 in storm costs to the town from our Dorian cleanup. And as a consequence, I just want to make the council aware. I know Councilman Wydok has been part of this, but the other council members may not be aware. We have a memorandum of agreement. Is Jimmy in the audience today or not?
I think he's walking
Oh,
in.
then I'll speak this real fast before he gets here.
Hurry up.
Yeah, we have a memorandum of agreement or of understanding in place with the community association that, among the many other things, deals with the relative responsibilities of the two entities for storm cleanup and the cost of storm cleanup. And the basic premise of that memorandum of understanding is that the community association is responsible for the cleanup of costs inside of the gate. Jimmy, we're talking about Kika as you walk in. The community association is responsible in concept for the cleanup of cost, or the cleanup of debris inside of the gate, and the town is responsible for the cleanup of debris outside of the gate. But then there are a number of clauses that give the town the ability, when and where it deems it necessary and in the public interest, or from a public safety or public health standpoint, to participate and to participate both operationally and from a cost standpoint on cleanup inside the gate of private property. And I think, as you all know, we've now been through 2 or 3 years successively of significant costs. And the costs to the town have predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly been cost of cleanup inside the gate, not outside of the gate. So I'm not in any way indicating that we will end up doing something different, but Stephanie, town administrator, Jimmy Bailey, Kika Silo, and I are meeting next week, and we're going to have some initial discussions about that MOU and how it's operating, whether it's accomplishing the intent of all of the parties. But particularly, I think the concern from the town standpoint is just the level of cost that we've been taking on. I just want to alert the council that we're going to have that issue is out there. We're going to have the conversation. We're not in any kind of debate or argument with the community association. I don't want to give that impression. But it's an issue we need to take a look at, and I know those costs are impacting them as well. Another thing I want to update the council on, and it relates certainly to one of the major items on the agenda today, where we're looking at the re-landscaping of the parkway. I think the council is aware that we have probably one of our major spending projects this year is potentially the repaving of the parkway. There are 2 primary goals behind that project. One is to obviously ensure that the parkway itself remains fully functional and operational for another 15 or 20 years, and that pavement has been down there a long time. It's showing a lot of signs of where we're having more and more maintenance issues. And our second goal is clearly to improve the aesthetics of that roadway, which is the real first thing that people see as they come onto this island. For your information, the Parkway resurfacing bid package now is slated to go out next week, so that the Public Works Committee has been working with our engineering contractor, McCormick, and I think that project bid package is almost complete now. It's scheduled to go out next week. For those of you who are not aware, that project involves a complete resurfacing of the road from the roundabout all the way to the first gate. It also is going to include the addition of some turn lanes off of the parkway that go into the property that is currently owned by Keel Island Golf Resort, sort of adjacent to the open lot. I think we call it the overflow parking lot. It includes the addition of a left turn lane in coming off island, and a right turn lane into that property going into the island, and a cleanup of the accesses so that we now, instead of having gravel and ruts, we'll have a real finished ingress and egress. It also will include a number of improvements to the road edges. We are not putting in curbing, but road edges that will include a new product that is intended to stabilize the areas off of the pavement, so that when all of the trucks on this island, except for Butch's, which never go off the pavement, better now, right? So that all these vehicles who drive off the pavement it is intended to prevent all of the rutting and buildup of the grass. So that project is moving forward. The bid packages are going to go out next week. We anticipate the bids being due the 30th of January, so town council, we should be looking at this. I think the thought is that we may have a special Ways and Means Committee probably prior to the February town council meeting to look at the bids. And right now, the intent is that that project would occur in the spring and be completed about 2 weeks, at the latest 2 weeks before the Memorial Day weekend. Have anything else? I think that's it for my updates. With that, citizens' comments. Is there anybody that has any comments related to items on the agenda? Wow, okay.
Actually, one.
Gotta come up and gotta do it.
I'll ask you after.
It's not that far, Greg. Come on. All right,
I have a question.
go ahead.
I wanted to know if we had any FEMA funds that came in for the hurricane.
Oh,
I can address it now or during I was going to address it during my town administrator's report, but I can address it now. We're still in the process of submitting paperwork, so if we start receiving anything, it probably won't be for at least a couple more months. We're still in the process. And again, that's only on the
Outside of the-
public portion. And out of what the mayor indicated, our public portion right now, we've submitted about 285,000. Not saying that they will accept all of that, so they can come back and reject that amount and say that we only have truly 70,000 that is eligible for reimbursement, and then that would be 75% of that amount.
Thank you.
all right. Any other citizens' comments? All right, with that, the primary item on the agenda today is to discuss the Parkway Conceptual Landscape Plan. So to start off, we have a presentation. I think as you'll recall, we contracted with Outdoor Spatial Design at the latter part of last year to work with us and work with a team that consisted of both town staff, ARB representatives, environmental committee representatives to look at some and present some options for improving the landscaping portion of the parkway. And so this will be a presentation of what the designs that they looked at, what some of the considerations were. The committee, I know, has identified out of that a preferred design. Just as one person who's looked at that, I will tell you, it's the more you can do to help us understand the differences between the different concepts will be helpful. I know for me, they all looked good, and so it's like, well, what's the difference between this and this? So they're going to do that presentation, and then they will be looking for our guidance so that the next step will be moving forward, putting together a bid package. So, you Evan or George?
I'm Evan.
Evan, got it. Okay.
All right.
Evan,
Take it
thanks.
away. So I'm Evan, that's George, and we're part of OSD, Outdoor Spatial Design. And just briefly, a little snippet about us. We started in 2011, and actually before that, I worked for a firm that's done a good bit of work on Kiowa, out at Ocean Course, Sanctuary, Cassique, the Parkway enhancements, as well as Fresh Fields. And then even before that, really have a heart for Kiowa. Grew up coming out here and remember the Jeep safaris and the straw market and everything. So we're honored to be part of the team to help develop these plans and really appreciate the opportunity. The way that this presentation is going to go today, we've amassed a good bit of research, as you've seen. George is going to walk you through the site analysis and all the research that we've collected, and then I'm going to come back and take you through how that research has shaped the design, and we'll talk about the differences between the two designs, and then we'll do a recap with the preferred design.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Evan. So as Mayor Weaver mentioned, the the first step of this project is the roadway engineering and resurfacing, which will be done by McCormick Taylor, and we're on the landscape side. In order to help us do our best job, we've consulted with a couple companies. There's one large company called, or a group rather, called the Pollinator Pathways that we've taken some inspirational design principles from, as well as a local landscape architecture firm that kind of specializes in native plants called Circulus. And then we also did a good amount of soil testing, and all of that was done through the Clemson University extension here.
Mm.
Oh. I want to go back. So the first step that happened a couple months ago, we were out here pretty often taking photographs and gathering field work to do our site analysis. And then we came up with some initial concept plans and renderings. We had a meeting with our clients. We got a good amount of comments back from that. We had our SurveyMonkey community survey out for a couple weeks and received some great feedback from the public that allowed us to finalize the master plans, which we are presenting today. And then after that, we'll incorporate any comments into our construction drawings and then manage the project through bidding and negotiation, contractor selection, and we love to be out there in the field as much as possible doing construction observation. Our project goals are to enhance the landscape around the Keough Island Parkway and creating a harmony between the built and natural environments. It's very important to us to use this opportunity and create a landscape that gives back to the native flora and fauna. I think we all love the existing natural beauty of Keough. There's also an educational aspect to this project. Some of these terms people are not very familiar with. You know, what's a wildlife corridor? Why are those important? What are pollinators and plants that are important for them? And we would hope that as part of this educational process, people learn some things that maybe they can incorporate in their own residences. We all love the marsh views out on Keough, so one of our big project goals is accentuating the existing views and uncovering views that may not be noticed yet. And then OSD's motto is just to elevate the experience of everyday life, and we bring that motto towards this project as well. Our study area starts at the main traffic circle, approaching Keough, and then it extends about 2.5 miles down to the roadway island at Beachwalker Drive, right before the main guardhouse. One of the first factors that we analyzed was studying the existing canopy coverage. We used Google Earth aerial photography to figure out where there are existing dense pockets of mature vegetation. And this is important not only because these will be shady areas, but also because of the wildlife that exists in these habitats. I want to mention Jim Jordan, who has done a lot of research over the years on bobcats, tagging them and tracking them, and put together a great report about why these are important. So part of this is just really me paraphrasing his research, but I understand that the bobcats are the apex predator on Keough, and they're one of really the only assets that we have that helps curb the deer population, which I think all of you know is somewhat of a problem. This relates to the canopy coverage because the bobcats tend to thrive in these existing woodland areas. And when you have a parkway that goes through it, it has the potential to fragment these habitats. So as part of this project, we've identified a few corridor areas where you have dense vegetation on both sides of the parkway, and we'd like to keep the vegetation in that area pretty dense and maybe have a canopy coverage over the road so that the bobcats don't have their habitats fragmented. Sun versus shade. This affects the microclimate of little areas along the parkway, And we need to understand that in order to select plants that will do the best in those areas. The areas in blue on this map are low environmentally sensitive areas. They're also prone to flooding and salt infiltration, and we want to make sure that these would be environmentally sensitive areas where we would not want to have a lot of pesticides, and would want to use plants that help filter the runoff, since a lot of the roadway runoff is going to be going into low-lying marsh areas that are environmentally sensitive. We took 12 soil samples along the parkway in key areas, and had Clemson do a soil analysis on all of these. One of the main things that we're looking at is the pH of the soils. The pH is a measure of how acidic or basic these soils are. 0 is very acidic, 7 is a neutral, and then 14 would be at the basic end of the spectrum. And what we found was that on average, our pH was in the high 7s. The lowest was at 8.1. The ideal range for a lot of the plants that we are proposing is around 6 or 6.5. So our soils are a little bit too basic currently to be ideal for those plants. The second biggest factor was the amount of calcium saturation in the soils. We spoke with a couple soil experts, one of them from Possum's Landscape Supply, and he had indicated to us that the reason the calcium is so high is because of the parent rock on Kiowa. It's very high in shell content and calcium, which also is part of the reason that the pH is high. So this is just kind of a naturally occurring thing, and our plan is going to be to come up with a soil prescription that we apply before we plant things, and then also after we plant them, to make sure that our soils are not limiting the health of our plants. And that's a continuous thing. It's not like you can just apply this once and then plant things and the plants will be happy forever. Over time, the soils will tend to go back to their natural pH and calcium levels. So this is kind of a work in progress, but as we do the construction documents, we're going to make sure that we have a maintenance plan for the soils long term, so that any plants that we are investing money into do the best that they can. The critical views were an important part of our analysis. One that I'd like to start on is when you are approaching the island, coming down Betsy Carrison. That is kind of your grand entry to Kiowa, that traffic circle. It's your first impression, and we think we should have a landscape there that kind of sets the tone for the rest of Kiowa. As well as aesthetics, it's also important that that landscape functions. For a traffic circle, that means opening up some views and making sure that the wayfinding works well and people know where they're going. We'll get into the public comments, but a lot of comments were that your first or second time to the island, or if you're a guest, it can be hard to navigate because there's not a lot of visibility through the circle. Moving down the parkway, some of these areas in red are existing views that we would like to keep or enhance, and some of these views are undiscovered views that we'd like to open up and show off, either nice woodland areas or open marsh views. And then the areas in black are kind of unsightly areas that we may want to screen. Near the traffic circle, there's a future senior center going in, and then we do have some buffer plant material by Freshfields and the PGA parking, but we'd like to enhance those and make sure that those continue to buffer those areas. And then we got a lot of comments about the new development on Little Rabbit Lane, so we'd come in with some plant material there to screen those views. The vehicular impact, we've already been talking about it a little bit with the rutting and the products that we're going to try and use, but this map shows you the orange areas, which you'll notice are usually around turns. I think that a lot of times trucks take those turns too narrow, or maybe people aren't paying attention on the straightaway and wander off the road a little bit. So part of our planting plan, we'll take all this into consideration. And then we looked at the signage. With the signage, the signs in white are existing signs. The ones in blue are wayfinding signs that have recently been replaced, and the signs in yellow are signs planned for future replacement. And we want to make sure that we don't block views of these signs and keep these areas aesthetically pleasing. In order to make sure that the concept plans we're presenting today are in line with what the community wants, we created this survey. We were thrilled to have 351 people respond to the survey. Of those respondents, about 65 of them use this section of the Keogh Island Parkway daily, or more, so that shows us that this is a highly visible area and receives a lot of traffic, so we think it's important that it's aesthetically pleasing. As well as 45% of people use the shared path for either biking or walking, and of that 45%, the mix pretty much ranges from daily to once a month. 45% is a good amount of people using these pathways. We want to make sure that they feel safe on the pathway and that their experience is also as nice as what the parkway will be. Our respondents were basically 50-50 full-time to part-time, and of those who were part-time, we wanted to know what seasons they come when they visit. Is there a season that's preferred? What we found is that there isn't. It's a pretty even distribution between seasons that people visit. That's important to us to make sure that we are selecting plants that have a mixture of evergreen for winter, and then also different bloom times for the flowering plant, so that it has year-long interest. We had a few open-ended questions. The first of them being, describe what you like or dislike about the current landscaping in the main traffic circle. Our top three answers were that respondents feel that this circle is either overgrown or outdated. People would like to see more native plant material and color. And then some people did say that it's fine as it is, but that didn't necessarily mean that they were opposed to changing it. It was just quotes like, "I never noticed anything negative," or "no complaints, I don't really look at it that much." We're hoping as we improve this landscape, people will appreciate the changes and think that the improvements were better than what it used to be, which was, it's fine, I don't really look at it. Other comments, we did receive a lot of people saying that they like the American flags, the holiday decor, they'd like to see more palms and trees, less lawn, and then also dislike the rutting. We asked the same questions for the landscaping of the rest of the parkway in general. The overwhelming answer here was that people found the parkway to be somewhat bland, too much green. I'd like to see more color and native plants. It's very boring. This is an island and should be more colorful. So we were glad to see that. Some other answers were, again, overgrown, outdated. A few people said it's fine as is, and we're not going to be re-landscaping every square foot of the parkway. So for those people, there are areas that will remain as is. Also, bike path safety, creating a separation between the bike path and the existing parkway, coming up with solutions for the rutting, and then opening up some of those nice marsh views. I've mentioned pollinators, so this slide is kind of a crash course in what are pollinators and why are they important, and why have we included this in this project. When people think pollinators, they think of bees, and they'd usually be right to think of the bees. The bees represent 80% of pollinators, and there's over 20,000 species of native bees in North America. But pollinators also include beetles, birds, butterflies, bats, flies, small mammals. The main issue that these animals are having is habitat fragmentation and pesticide use is the main one. The bees especially are incredibly susceptible to pesticides. A lot of biologists attribute colony collapse disorder, which is decimating bee populations, to overuse of pesticides. There's been a 75% decline in flying insects in the last 25 years. We mentioned that the pollinators are necessary to fertilize plants in our yards, but also important to food sources because they pollinate orchards and farms. The range of these animals is on average about 750 meters, which is about half a mile. Some go further and some go less, but that's the average. And then one interesting thing we need to take into account when we pick plants is that some native pollinators have evolved to need a specific kind of plant, a native plant. An example of this is monarch butterflies. We've seen a 95% reduction in the monarch butterflies in the last 30 years, and milkweed is their only host plant. So without milkweed, there are no monarch butterflies. So we would take that strategy into account, not only with monarchs, but other pollinators that require specific plants when we're picking plants. And then how does this affect our landscape, our concept plants today? We use this analysis to pick areas where we think these types of plants would do well. We would want to install clusters of each plant species in nearby swaths. The bees especially, they tend to stick to one plant every day. One day they might like coneflower, and the next day they might like black-eyed Susans. So having the same plant in clusters in vicinity makes it easiest for them to pollinate and do their job well. And then part of it is education to the public, but also landscape maintenance companies. These areas are not actually low maintenance. They do require weeding and seasonal replenishing. So just educating the community and trying to evolve the expectations of these types of landscapes is part of our goal. So taking into account the site analysis and community feedback, we created 2 areas of enlarged plans. The first labeled on this map, A1, A2, those are 2 concept plans that relate to the main traffic circle. And then the same approach was used at the area approaching the causeway. We created concepts with the same ideas and called that B1 and B2. And then the areas that you see in red are before and after renderings that we've done along the parkway. I'll give it back to Evan, and he can take you through our concepts.
All right. So like George said, you know, we're gonna look at these enlargements of these 2 main areas, looking at both concepts for each one. So a great comment just to start out is, you had asked, kind of what are the differences, and there's actually a really good point in that question, and it's that the differences are somewhat subtle. And as we compiled all this research, we realized that there was one kind of umbrella general concept, but we were studying almost two variations of that. And really it was just a scale of how much is going to be native centered and more, more of a sustainable approach versus how much was going to be very clean and tidy. And so we kind of wanted to show almost both ends of the spectrum, and that's what we'll walk through today. So as you look at a plan view of the traffic circle, you will see that in the middle, the big idea in the middle of the traffic circle, and we'll look at before and after photos that are actually a lot easier to visualize. But in the main part of the traffic circle, our goal is to really clean that out a good bit and to remove a lot of the overgrowth and a lot of the understory, and to be able to, as you approach the traffic circle, from Charleston coming down Betsy Harrison, to be able to see the entrances either into Freshfields or over to Seabrook or onto Kiowa and have that help in wayfinding. And so really we'd like that. We'd like to accentuate, there's a number of palm trees already there, and we'd like to accentuate that palm grove, add palm trees, and then add somewhat of a low ground plane. So when you come in, you can see where you're going more easily. And everything in the middle can really act as this native foundation with the pollinator pockets. In this plan, we still keep a decent amount of sod. So in this is concept A1, we still keep some sod, so it keeps a nice clean edge. We reduce the sod from what's there now, probably by about half. We reduce the sod significantly, but we still come in and we add pollinators where we can. You know, right now in some of these, there's some lawn and some kind of dwarf yopon hedges. We want to reduce a lot of the hedges. We want to reduce the maintenance of people coming out and trimming and keeping things clean, but we still want to maintain a clean edge in some areas. Some of the feedback we got in the survey was everybody loves to see the flags, so we wanted to make sure that we had a place to show those off. That's what you see here is we have some ornamental trees, some native ornamental trees with some spring color, things that pop up. We have the sod in a number of areas, and then we have this palm grove that kind of connects all the way through. So that's what it looks like today.
Are you,
No, go ahead.
are you
Feel
gonna
free.
remove these shrubs right here in the front?
Those right there, can you see?
Yes.
Yes.
Those are beautiful, aren't they? It really looks tacky in this
all of
picture,
them.
doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so those are dwarf yopon hollies,
Yeah.
and they have their place, but we would prefer them to be in areas where they don't have to be constantly trimmed. You know, if they're in the
Right.
background and just let them go, they're great for habitat, and you know, the berries and everything are very important for wildlife. But see, we want to change it
Right,
to something like that.
that's good.
So it's a number of these palm trees that you see in the background are already there. And just by opening up, you know, and cleaning it out, and then coming in with some ornamental grasses, this little section right here with some pollinators and you know, flowers and seasonal color, that will be attractive coming in. And then instead of the evergreen, the dwarf yopon hollies that were there before, you know, instead of that, we would go with something, and we haven't selected our final plants, but something like native dwarf palmettos don't have to be trimmed constantly.
Right.
So, and then we can have things like sweetgrass and you know, flowers, things like that that will help make it attractive throughout the year. And this is coming from Seabrook into the circle. So again, remove those yopon hollies, remove the lawn, and then have a mixture of evergreens for winter interest. Add some height where we can do that to where it doesn't seem too open. And then you can kind of see, I'm gonna jog back and forth here, you can see where in this area where it's overgrown and you can't see through, we want to try to open that up. And we want to reduce the lawn, but we still have lawn on these edges. And we have the palm trees, and we keep the large trees in the middle of the circle, the oak trees. I think we would plan on removing some of those cedar trees, and but there's a lot of nice things that we can reuse.
Oh, good.
And then this is the Freshfields entrance. You can see their sign right there. So again, you can see how much lawn we have. We still have some lawn. This is just kind of one of the subtle differences that we'll look at. Some lawn, but still pollinators, color, evergreen, winter interest, flowering trees, native flowering trees, and then opening up to where we can see the sign better, all around the entire circle, just better visibility. And then in the signage, the areas where we have important signs, you can see where the landscape, you know, it has to constantly be trimmed. It wants to grow over that sign desperately. And then the color, you know, it's struggling a little bit with some of the annuals, and we would like to go in and simplify it. You know, open it up to where we can really appreciate even some of the views into the woods that we'll look at even more so later. Could be nice. So, but again, some shrubs that don't have to be constantly trimmed, color, pollinators, an evergreen edge, but still some lawn in this concept.
And is all of this color coming from perennials? I mean, things that, or most of it that doesn't have to be replanted year to year?
Most of it would not need to be replanted year to year, but one of the slides that George presented, and it's very important that expectations are managed properly.
Mhm.
There needs to be an item in the budget to replenish some of it. Because with any of it, it has its life cycle, and
Mhm.
there would need to be something in there that said, okay, we're gonna come in and plant 2% per year. That's something that we would help determine in the detailed drawings. So this is concept A2, and really what you notice, the main difference, we still, from a foundational standpoint, we have the same concept in the middle with the palm trees, the lower, more open landscape, but then you'll notice that we don't have any lawn. And so all the lawn is replaced with pollinators, with natives, with ornamental grasses, and so this is really the other end of the spectrum where we say, okay, how far does Kiowa want to go with this? We realize that with any lawn, there needs to be pesticides, and so there is going to be some overspray. There's going to be some, bees don't like loud noises, so you do give up a little bit of the ecological benefits by having any lawn at all. But in our first concept, A1, we're still improving that significantly. So that's what you see in concept 2 is the full-on, full native and pollinator pocket type landscape. So in here, we go with, and then you can kind of see, we remove the lawn on the sides, there's no lawn in the middle, there's no, we're bringing these plants all the way to the edge. And then the plants that we would select, basically, it would be somewhat of a self-healing landscape where these plants want to constantly crawl and grow and spread to where if they are damaged by vehicles or whatever else, that it could somewhat repair itself, not fully. It would need some help from the maintenance company from time to time, but this is basically, showing what it would look like to have the full effect. And that's, we understand that our job is not only the practical and the sustainable side of the design, but it's also aesthetics. And that's obviously, as you can see, what we're trying to communicate here is just the aesthetics of it. Same view from Seabrook coming in, and you can see where instead of lawn, we showed lawn, it's bringing ornamental grasses and pollinators all the way to the edge. Same in here. Again, subtle differences where we just show basically no lawn. It's just a very natural look. This one's a little overwhelming. So this brings us to the next. So we looked at the roundabout, and then we chose a section of the parkway that represented a couple of different scenarios where we have the bike path and we have a small landscape strip in between it. Concept B is we have a good bit of sod in here, as well as some improvements to the ornamental grasses. And one thing to keep in mind is when the road is installed, a good bit of what is there now, whether it's sod or ornamental grasses, will be destroyed through the being a laydown area or equipment. So this is basically coming back with an approach that has the sod in between the bike path and the main roadway. And this is a section we drew where we show basically the woodland edge, and then we have the road section, and then we have that small little landscape area in between the bike path and the road, and we're showing just small, little side strip in there. Again, kind of a little less sustainable approach to what we showed before.
One of the, maybe you can address, one of the problems or at least issues we have is there are a number of places along the parkway where the distance between the bike path and the road are are really very narrow.
Right.
And while I realize that shrubs and bushes aren't going to offer any additional protection from a vehicle, they still, sense is that if you have some things there, they can at least give some additional sense that, hey, there's a bike path there, cars are close. It helps drivers realize where they're at. Have you looked at that, and are you recommending any different use of plants in between in those spaces to somehow at least give greater perception of a separation between the path and the road?
We do, definitely. And matter of fact, in this scenario here, concept B2, graphically we show, instead of having lawn in there as much, we show ornamental grasses. Ornamental grasses can easily be waist high. They can create that feeling of separation and at least a feeling of security. We actually, a little bit more detail, in this road section, here you can see the difference between the car and the person on the path. That's where we have a little bit more of that height. So we feel like we have a great opportunity, and we haven't really hit on it. George showed a slide that talked about the water filtration, and we would love to, where we can, if we create a little bit of a swale in between the bike path and the roadway, it can capture some of that runoff, the water runoff, into that swale and help filter that water out before it makes its way into the marsh. And so it's a little bit difficult to see at this scale, but we actually we show a little bit of a dip here, so that's a swale, and then we show a little dash line that has an overflow mechanism to where if we have torrential rains, it can go in the overflow and make its way out. But the idea is that water would shed off of that road into this depressed area that's full of ornamental grasses and pollinators and natives and color, and would help on another level, help do what's right, for the environment and filter that water as much as possible before it makes its way into the marsh. So that's what this section, really the main difference between the two concepts is in this zone here, where instead of lawn, or instead of just one type of, really small plant, we have a nice mix that shows things that create separation as well as are good for the environment. And we show some before and after photos of that as well. This is another, so this is coming out of the Fresh Fields, I guess the back entrance. One of the things that we wanted to highlight were the woods here. This is just an important maintenance idea, is that what happens is where you have dense woods, you tend to just cut along an edge, and it almost forms a hedge of, it's natural plants, native plants for the most part, but it becomes a hedge, and what we would like to do is open it up to where you can see in a little bit more in key areas. And so it's important to us, again, it's a subtle detail, but from more of a hedge to opening it up. And then we still have the evergreens, the pollinators, a little bit of lawn in here you can see, and then some nice native vegetation, some dwarf palmettos, things like that. But allowing views into there would not only look nice, but it would look more natural to where things are not so rigid and structured. It's actually the exact same approach we took on Summer Islands, where they had that same condition, and we trimmed out and let views go into those woods. So this is a typical roadway section. This plays on George's slide where we were talking about views, how it's important to open views. There's a number of wax myrtles and things in here that can be cleaned up. The oaks could be trimmed a little bit and cut down to open up views to where you can see those long marsh views, which I actually remember probably 10, 15 years ago when you'd make that first bend right before you get to the bridge. So this is showing ornamental grasses and some evergreens, and then opening up views into the marsh. And that's probably your first big view of the marsh as you come on to Kiowa. And see, we have this condition here where you can see the runoff just goes right over the top of the walkway into the marsh. And we would like to change that condition to look more like this, where you have some variety of plant material that helps grow and heal. You have a mixture of deciduous and evergreen, and then we use, instead of sweetgrass throughout, we would use a more aggressive spreading spartina that is native but also, will thrive. And then another area where we feel like it would be easy to open views and appreciate the marsh and the wildlife. This is another good one. You can see Little Rabbit in the background. This is where we talk about screening some of the views. So with just, popping in some palm trees in key areas, it's a very simple, easy way to help reduce that visual impact, and then come in and mix in pollinators, native ornamental grasses, things like that. So you can already see, you're talking about separation between the street and the bike path. See right there, you have vegetation that's about waist high that helps create some separation and feel a little bit safer. The palm trees help that as well. We love the signage. We'd love to have more signage. Any opportunity to educate the public on the importance of natives and pollinators, and to gain more support for the Grow Native initiative would be great. Come in and again create that mixture. We even have possibly some vines that grow on the guardrail, palm trees strategically placed, and then a nice mixture of pollinators and ornamental grasses that help create that space. And this is that first landscape island right before you get to Beach Walker. And what we did, you have these beautiful crepe myrtles in the background, so we really wanted to open this up. Come in with a little bit lower, so nice color. Again, we need that evergreen spine, the evergreen kind of skeleton there, so we have winter interest. And then we open this up to where you can see more of the crepe myrtles. We dress the edges a little bit with some soft, low, ground covers, but we still keep the sod. This is another view of that same island, where we're really just simplifying it and taking advantage of what's there. So you get the beautiful crepe myrtles, and then we come in with native evergreen shrubs and some color, pollinators along the edge, and we still keep some lawn to where it's nice and clean. So this concept A1 was the preferred concept, and that's where we find that balance between the nice clean lawn edge, not overwhelming. Instead of a 40-foot deep lawn area, it might be more like 15 feet. But we're able to come in and improve the ground plane with pollinators, with natives, with low-growing ornamental grasses and shrubs, and we keep that clean and open. We keep that clean lawn edge. So you've seen these. This is just kind of a recap of what was the preferred look. So we still keep that lawn, so we can have the flags when we need that. Again, this was the preferred concept for the roundabout with a little bit of lawn in key areas.
And if I can ask for the team that was evaluating this, was the primary driver between A1 and A2, more lawn versus less, was that primarily aesthetic preference, or were there, when you got under issues like maintenance, upkeep, cost of were those drivers as well, or is this really an aesthetic choice?
There were more drivers than aesthetics. I'd say aesthetic was kind of the easiest one. As we've talked to the maintenance company, and we know that based on what they're telling us, that there's not a significant savings by going with native plants, because they need to get in and they need to, anywhere they can't use pesticides, they need to hand pick weeds. So maintenance costs go up probably a little bit initially, and then as the plants fill in, our goal is to have those costs reduced. But based on our conversations right now, they're saying it's kind of a wash, if anything. But there would need to be in the budget allocated money for replenishing some of the native plant material, some of the pollinators. So there was definitely cost consideration. In areas where we can save lawn, to resod an area might cost $1 a square foot. So if there's 50,000 square feet throughout the parkway we can save, that's $50,000 we save. So anywhere where we can reuse and it makes sense, that's what we want to do. There's also areas of the parkway that you really don't see the landscape because of the road pitch and because of the existing vegetation. And so we would not propose tearing anything out, you know, that you can't see and replacing with new. So part of our goal in the next level of detail in the construction drawings would be to make sure that the town really is getting the best bang for the buck, and we're using new plants in the right places.
You've mentioned a couple times the need to annually replace and renourish, which makes sense. Do we have a sense for how much that is as a premium today compared to what we do today?
Well, it's my understanding that there's not a budget to replenish today at all. That's what I've been told. And until we have hard numbers, we've created a very broad conceptual idea of what we think this would cost based on other projects. We've worked on Ocean Park and some neighborhoods in Cassique. So we basically have an idea of how much per linear foot of road different types of landscapes are. But we don't know exactly what that replenishment cost would be. Once we develop detailed drawings, I mean, frankly, it would vary depending on weather conditions, probably more than anything. If we had a hurricane, if we had some of the flooding like we've had in the past, the landscape that we would design, the detailed, plant selections would weather as much as possible, but depending on what nature throws at us, those costs could fluctuate.
And would those costs be more visible once the plan is out for bid? I mean, can a contractor say, boy, you're gonna have to replenish X percentage every year at such and such a cost?
It would.
Okay.
We definitely, yeah, and I'd say once we have detailed planting plans and we know exactly how many plants and we know roughly the size of the plants that we would put in based on the budget that we have, that would allow us to say, okay, well, the maintenance company could say, with this type of landscape, we typically see a 1% or a 2%, replenishment rate.
Sure.
So we can look at that and go, okay, well, 2% of X is this.
Okay.
So we could come up with an estimate on that.
One thing on the lawn versus no lawn is that for maintenance, it would be easier if they had a piece of lawn to be working on. I think it would be safer also, not having people work on the plants that go all the way up to the road.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see, these are just the rest of the recap of what we talked about as far as the preferred plan, showing, there's a little bit of lawn area. And you're right, it would allow them, if they're hand picking weeds, to set their debris bags right there on the edge of the lawn, and it would keep them further from the street. And frankly, one of the decisions, so, I remember watching, actually work construction on Cassique when the golf course was built. And I remember watching that entry drive develop. And even the firm where I work developed the landscape of that entry drive, and I've watched that evolve, and how it went from a very wild landscape going in to a lot of those grasses being removed, and sprayed out with pesticides, and then lawn going in, and then the shade takes over, and then the lawn doesn't work, and now there's grease grass on a lot of those edges. So a lot of that is we're trying to kind of beat that cycle with this, and we know that the landscape at Kiowa, where native and natural is very important. I mean, it's a fundamental philosophy within the Kiowa landscape. There still is that clean edge that makes it look like it's natural and native, but it's also controlled. This is just that one again. So this is the preferred concept, where we show the taller plants in between the bike path and the roadway. That's that same section where you can see the relationship of the car to the pedestrian.
And so again, along the parkway, that still uses a balanced use of sod. There's still significant areas of sodding.
There would still be sod in those areas, in a lot of areas. No, there's some where the condition where we have rutting And the solution that McCormick Taylor is developing, we would need to have sod over that, over that structural component. So there would be sod in those areas. But there's also areas where that landscape, because it's somewhat of a loose landscape, it would be allowed to heal and grow in and somewhat be replenished a little bit. There would be sod in this area. And this basically is just going through, kind of reiterating on what George presented earlier about how we talked to a number of different companies and consultants in how we develop a plan. And then we also talk about the next steps, how after we confirm the conceptual plan selection, that we dive into the construction documents and the native plant species, the selections, and we develop those plans. And then we basically catch up with McCormick and go through the bidding and negotiation, pick a landscape contractor, and then we know that one of the next meetings that we can present to, our next set of findings would be on the March 3rd, I think is what it is.
How many different landscape contractors are interested in this type of work in both scope and expertise?
I mean, I think if it were put out to public bid, there would be dozens.
It's a big
That'd be dozens more than we normally get.
Yeah, and I would think that,
It's a huge contract.
2 is more than we want.
Yeah, that's my point. So this is a rather well sought after type of activity. Okay.
and it's a sizable project. 2.5 miles of roadway, both sides being landscaped, is a large project for a landscape contractor.
And for the actual planting, the execution, what's the prime time that needs to occur to ensure again that the plants take, that the weather doesn't, is that a summer, fall, winter? What are we aiming at in terms of actually putting stuff in the ground?
Well, so we would really be, for the most part, at the mercy of the roadway improvement.
And let's just say for a moment that we're
Ideally.
on target, and so by the middle of May, that paving is done.
So I would say if the landscape, all of it could be installed in that middle of May to middle of June timeframe, it would be fine. Trees prefer to be installed when it's cooler outside, and the sap in the trees is not flowing. So, but the ornamental grasses and the natives, those are going to look the best out of the nursery in that May, June, July time period. Now, landscape contractors typically have a 1-year warranty on their plant material, so they're willing to plant all year round. I remember personally, I was the one doing the construction observation out at the ocean course when the new drive went in, and we laid out maybe 50,000 grasses, but most of them, because it was in the wintertime, most of them were just buckets of dirt. And they were labeled, but we kept our fingers crossed hoping they were labeled properly because you couldn't see it.
So some of this could occur early on, some of it might be fall plants, trees and stuff might be wait till the fall. Is what
It
you're
could.
saying. Questions?
And the committee that's recommending the preferred ones, you've met with the committee, they've seen both of these options, you've had all the questions asked of you, you can imagine, is that true?
That's correct.
Okay. And do you concur with their opinion as to it being manageable, successful in terms of its efforts, aesthetics aside?
I do, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, we've got this on a later item to actually get into us discussing the item, so
Yeah.
this was the presentation. So any more questions of our presenters?
I have one question. What is the wildlife corridor?
What is the wildlife corridor? Oh, you're talking about the slide that George presented that
Yeah,
showed
there's
that?
several, 4 of them, I think,
Here, let's go back to it.
in the beginning.
Well, Jim, do you want to address that, or?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, wildlife corridor is simply, right, where wildlife travels from point A to point B, right? It's typically a certain type of habitat, but, as George and Evan pointed out, it's typically where you've got forested areas that neck down to the roadway with another forested area on the other side. So animals want to cross right there. So you wouldn't want to disrupt that.
Right.
Taking out a bunch of trees or altering that, the landscape.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you,
Okay.
appreciate it.
I assume you'll be here during our next discussion if we have questions as we get into the item.
Yes.
Yeah, all right. On this item? Why don't we just, does anybody have any, while they're up here, anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? I'll go ahead and do that.
Got one?
Yeah. Go for it.
Tim Barnes, 538 Buffalo Head. I have a number of questions, but one of the things that really concerns me is if we have really evaluated the cost. Because we're talking about pruning, weeding, replenishing, and I really would like to know more, because with all of this plant vegetation being put in, there has to be some weeding. There has to be some pruning. And you said replenishment only 1 or 2%. I don't know if that's really a realistic number. I'm very concerned about the cost of this proposal. I think your pictures are fabulous and the ideas are fabulous, but I would really encourage the council to really weigh in on this, because when you talk about weeding alone, somebody has got to do that. Somebody's got to prune. That's my first thing that I was thinking about. And second of all, I didn't hear you say anything about sightline. When you come into the circle, just when you come into the circle from Seabrook, you're talking about putting palm trees there. The sight lines are gonna be dramatically impacted. If you're coming out the back gate of Freshfields by the car wash, and taking out that turn, you're putting some grasses there. The sight lines are gonna be dramatically impacted. I think I can see pretty good, but I know a lot of people don't see very well, with our community. And I think these sight lines need to be, addressed. I really question how high some of this vegetation should be. You didn't mention that at all, I don't think, about sightlines. Anyway, those are two of my, and thirdly, you mentioned about taking out the understory at the circle, and I assume, Jim, that's okay with you. You run that by, taking out some of the understory?
Sure.
Okay, that's not gonna impact on the, Bobcats?
In the circle itself, we're gonna replace it with similar plant material that does not need to be pruned and constantly trimmed. So, if we're taking out dwarf yopon hollies that are constantly kept into these shapes of balls, and replacing it with single liners, it's still gonna be cover for bobcats, but it will be much less maintenance.
Would you agree that there has to be weeding every year and pruning every year? If not,
Well, and we do that now. And I think we're gonna get Tim in when we handle this discussion, we're gonna talk about the next step and where a lot of those questions come from, so, yeah, yeah. No, that's fine. Okay,
Do you want me to answer those two questions?
I'm just gonna get, because then we're gonna move into our discussion of this, but since I've taken a couple questions, I'm gonna take real quick, while you all are up here, 2 more questions, and then we'll move into our next area.
The circle will be paved.
How far on the town hall side of the circle?
Only here in the circle.
Well, so we will, I don't know how to explain it. If the detailed drawings, a lot of this information will come out in the detailed drawings where we will take McCormick Taylor's roadway improvements and we will see the actual property lines. This presentation, being conceptual in nature, is we're showing areas, for example, around the Freshfields entry, where the property actually does not belong to the town. And so there are other entities that we would need to coordinate with to say, hey, are you on board with this? Is this something that you would like to take part of? And then there's other areas where it might be in the rendering that we're showing some of the, the artwork going a little bit further than what is allowable. So as you didn't see any property lines on the rendering, that's gonna be defined in the next stage.
All right, and then John, you had a quick question.
I just had two quick things. One on the Parkway redo. Are you gonna move the entrance to that parking lot so it's not right around the curve?
There's going to be the location of it will be about where it is now, but there's going to be a dedicated right turn lane going into it. So the traffic going in is going to be angling off of the curve prior to that.
And then the other thing, I think all these things look beautiful. I just know from my own experience that anything in color seems to be a wonderful food source for habitat. And I'm assuming that all the things we're gonna put in will not be attractive to habitat.
Well, so without a doubt, the plants that we would select would be as deer tolerant as possible, but we also know that deer are eating more and more plants. Part of that would be having enough variety where if deer were to eat one thing that they typically don't eat, there still would be plenty around and allow that to grow in. Deer also eat new plants, so that's another consideration is, I know in Ocean Park, just last year, we planted several dozen beautyberry right next to a huge stand of existing beautyberry. The deer came in and ate the new beautyberry. Now, the beautyberry kept flushing back out, and it's grown in, but there is some of that. It's definitely out here with the salt inundation and the deer population and the wind. It's a tough environment. So having that variety is what's going to help us make it an attractive landscape.
Okay. All right, thanks. So we're going to move into a council discussion on this item next. So we have no old business, so we'll move to new business, item A, which is to approve a Parkway conceptual landscape design. Stephanie, how do you want to do this? Jim, are you going to outline for us, or what do you know at this point? Because we're not approving a bid or a specific bid design. My understanding at this point is what the committee is looking for at this point is simply a sense from the council, as you've looked at a couple different approaches, some guidance back to them as to whether we're in concurrence with the direction the committee wants to go.
That's correct, because their next step is that we would need to be able to then go ahead and design for getting ready for the bid package. So they would need to know which direction council will like to move in terms of, they presented two designs, A1 and A2, and then they gave you the committee's preference, and then also the strategy for the B portion. So we just need to know if you're supportive or if you like what the committee is recommending, or if you wanted to go a different route.
Because but I think at this point, what's clear is we're not yet committing to any particular expenditure. We're not committing to any cost. And we still, as part of the bid package, would be still dealing with and addressing, I think, some of the good questions that have been raised of, well, okay, at the end of the day, how much are we actually willing to spend as a town? And what are the impact on things like maintenance costs and so on. So we're not trying to decide all of those things today.
That is correct, but with the understanding that they did present what they thought was potentially a cost estimate for the recommended path that the committee has selected. But you're right, they still have to go ahead and design it. We have to bid it out. When the costs come in, and it comes back before the Ways and Means, very similar to the Parkway, comes back to Ways and Means for consideration and approval. But when they leave today, they need some sense of direction to know, okay, this is what we need to do in terms of putting together the bid package so that can go out. If we're concerned about any long-term maintenance issues, I think we need to address that today. So as they're putting together their design, they understand that either they need to add more natives or cut back natives or cut back on plantings, so that when we put out a bid packet, it's basically what we desire and want.
So let me open to the council members and just, I guess, some
I-
initial reactions.
I'd like to hear from Jim, if you can give us a sense from, I assume you're on the committee,
Yes.
if you can give us a sense for what some of that discussion has been, what the give and take has been, and why you guys have landed where you've landed.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the committee's been very involved. We've had a number of meetings, looked at these conceptuals. And again, you know, the committee, in terms of the roundabout, right, we looked at two basic options, but we were discussing other alternatives, right, going even further one way or even further the other way, you know, but before we got to these final two conceptuals. What the committee liked about more sod at the roundabout was that, you know, as you approach the island, you've got fresh fields, which is fairly heavily developed, a lot of sod in there, right? We didn't want to go completely native and away from sod as you approach. We wanted it to kind of blend with fresh fields and going to Seabrook. But then as you transition to Kiowa, you then start to see a reduction in sod and an increase in natives, which is why we like the B2 approach for the rest of the parkway, because it reduces even further the amount of sod, except in areas where it's really required. And again, we also really liked the swales in between the roadway and the bike path, not only because they filter water, but, you know, just obviously, as you said, you know, once you've got vegetation that's this tall, it's, you know, it certainly, at least in my mind, should keep drivers on the road more, right? You're likely to wander off the roadway if it's sod, but if there's a shrub this high, you're probably not going to run into it. So that was another thing we liked. We talked a lot about maintenance cost. Obviously, we wanted to try to reduce maintenance costs, right? We wanted to go, you know, with a lot more natives that would be less maintenance costs going forward, which I think, you know, and Evan kind of got to this, I think we'll probably, hopefully see a reduction in maintenance costs long-term, but maybe not on the front end.
I don't know it off the top of my head, but do you have a sense for what our maintenance costs
Yeah, that's
are
what I
this
was
year?
gonna ask.
You know, what's our typical, with the greenery, we've got a contract with the greenery.
Brian?
I asked Dorota to look into that, and our contract amount's $3,700 a month. Annually. Some, right, that we add.
$140,000, $150,000 a year for maintenance today. I got you.
That would be good.
Yeah, for the next level of discussion, that would be helpful, but,
Yeah,
okay,
and I
thank you.
guess the only other point I'd make, you know, and obviously early on, we walked the entire parkway, you know, looking at all these areas, they were taking pictures, you know, and you get a little bit of it from looking at their before and afters, but it looks really bad in a lot of
Oh,
places.
my
There's no
God,
doubt.
yes.
I mean, really bad. And so, in my mind, if maintenance costs go up 50% and we have a beautiful lush landscape, you know, leading the way into Kiowa, then, you know, that's probably what we need to do, right? We don't need to cut corners and have it keep looking like it's looking now.
Yeah, the status
just-
quo,
it
the
just
status
doesn't-
quo is awful.
Right.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work right now.
Okay.
So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Well, assuming for a moment that in the next 15 minutes, the town council gives you some sense of of what you really want at the moment, which is your A1 versus A2 versus B. What happens over the next month or so? What's the next step?
So when we are given direction, which way to go, because, you know, the goal today is are we headed in the right direction with this preferred concept? And if you say yes, then we coordinate with McCormick Taylor. We basically import their latest roadway improvement drawings, and we start picking out every single plant and developing an overall plan that can be sent to contractors to get apples to apples bids. And then there would be additional presentations during that would include an opinion of probable cost, even, you know, more detailed than what we've done before. And at some point when we get bids, that would be presented. So it's basically just taking, you know, we're looking at almost a watercolor right now, and we're dialing it in down to the detailed landscape plan.
I mean, I'll step out and just to get the discussion going, give you my sense, which, you know, my personal sense on this, which is from an aesthetic standpoint. Personally, I think you're on the right track. In terms of what I envision, what we were thinking about in terms of the magnitude of change in the look and feel of the parkway and the vegetation, that we weren't trying to be, that we were trying to do something more than just an incremental cleanup, as far as staying within what we think is the brand, the character of what we're describing and selling to people, whether they be tourists or whether they be residents, what we're selling as the natural look of this island. I think you're aesthetically in the right direction. My sense is, though, that what we need to do is move forward in a way where the council has 3 or 4 places here where we can put the brakes on. And we're gonna wanna put the brakes on, we may wanna put the brakes on when we get a better understanding of some of these nuts and bolts operational. You know, what you know, one of the things we wanted to achieve was at least not more maintenance, but if something easier maintenance, you know, plants that were going to have a better life to them and not look as worn as everything we have. So I think we would want to be in where there's a clear step that, from an aesthetic standpoint, directionally we like what you're doing, but there needs to be a next step where we can answer some of these questions. Say, okay, if we go this way, what are we gaining and what are we losing and what do we need to understand in terms of potential future cost? And then I think we need to have a speed bump with respect to just the overall cost. I mean, at the end of the day, there is some level of cost that we're gonna choke on and say, wow, that's more than we're willing to do, or we're gonna have to be really satisfied that there's an improvement, you know, a real value improvement to the community in doing that. And to some extent, I need to parallel the understanding the cost of this with the bid package on the parkway. Because if we get blown out of the water on the parkway with some level of cost that we just were not expecting, we're gonna need to weigh that. So my sense is that from an aesthetic standpoint, from what, you know, from the direction you're going, I like what I see, but I need to have a few places along here say, oh, okay, we need to learn a few more things before I'm not ready to go out and you know, approve a package to somebody for $600,000 to start putting plants in the ground.
Right.
That's
I
where I'm.
I think that's fair. Everything looks beautiful, you know, in drawings they always do. I really I don't have any expertise in this area, so I would tend to rely on Jim and his committee as to what the preferred options are. So yeah, I've got no problems with giving some guidance to proceed as you guys are on the track.
Marianne?
I've been involved in a significant landscaping change like this. Certainly not as big, but it was a major do-over of a landscaping plan. And we ran into the same problem where the cost was significant and not something we were ready to take on in 1 year. And basically what we did was we divided the implementation of the program into 3 sections: year 1, year 2, and year 3. That way the cost could be spread over time, and it gave us more time to adjust to some of the changes you need, like the maintenance.
Right.
Do you think something like that could be accomplished with this plan?
If it needed to, absolutely. It could certainly be phased. And the cost, you know, we actually prepared a slide where, you know, we were taking kind of our best stab at what we think that range might be. But the cost of a landscape, you can start with plants that are this big for $8 a piece, or you can put them in this big for $100 a piece. So you can have the same landscape ultimately when it matures for very different costs. And so it can be phased. It can be, you know, we can prepare detailed drawings that if the costs come back and you say, well, no, that's X number of dollars more than we want to spend, then we change those drawings to either to be phased or to be reduced to be in budget. So we were definitely prepared. We at no point anticipated to bring back a set of drawings and say, here it is. We still imagine there's gonna be a back and forth through the detailed design, where we're on top of not only the construction costs, but also the maintenance costs. And we have a letter from the greenery. We spoke to them, and they went through that first meeting, and we talked at length about the difference between hand weeding versus what you save on pesticides and herbicides and aeration and all that. And that's how we arrived at the opinion that it might initially be a slight increase in cost, but not significant based on what the greenery is telling us. And then in our walk, when we were all out on site, there was one section on landscape where we said, well, what greenery, what are you doing here? And they said, well, we really don't do much right here. We said, that's perfect. You know, so ultimately, when it grows in, our goal is that there's significant areas where the greenery is not doing much. And you know, if there's a wax myrtle that's starting to block a view, maybe they take that out or things like that. But it's not. If we plant the right plants and they take over, the weeds are going to have a harder time.
Klaus?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm with Chris. I don't have a lot of expertise here. I've made a career out of keeping out of my wife's landscaping decisions completely, and that's probably a good thing. I've just written the checks. I would just, the one thing I do remember is the 1 or 2 times that for some reason or the other we phased something, it wound up costing more and not less. In my mind, phasing a project like this, the only really good reason to do it is if you don't have the money on hand to pay for it. Then, of course, you have to. If you have to raise the money later. I think phasing is different from what Craig addressed, which is we want speed bumps. We want to be able to say, okay, here's a decision point, here's a decision point. That, I think, makes all the sense in the world. But when I look at that, I mean, first of all, it does look awesome. It really does. But I think whatever we decide, and I see no reason for me not to go with this, but again, not my expertise, I think we should plan it out, look at the cost, small plants, big plants, whatever, agree on that, and then get it done. I don't really see the spreading it out over 3 years because it's going to look scraggly for 2 of those 3, and I don't think we're going to save any money.
Actually, it doesn't, but that's your feeling on it. It doesn't look scraggly.
Okay, but I don't think we're going to save any money either because
Okay.
the moment
Well,
you
that's
spread
important.
it, it's like, you know, now you have to bring people out again and again and
that's
again. I
important.
don't know that you save any money. I'm sure it doesn't look, because I said my expertise is
No,
zilch,
that's
so
all right.
I don't know.
The only thing is, I feel this is really important for Kiowa. This is what people see when they come here. With the PGA coming up, we're gonna have many, many more visitors than we normally would. And it really doesn't look good now, as we all believe. And I do think it's important that we do the best thing for this project, whether that's fewer plants, because I'm sure there's a way to do that, or just phasing in, or doing the whole thing. And I think we need to have the costs associated to make an intelligent decision.
What is the timing on this, by the way? I don't know if we talked about this. If we gave the go-ahead in whatever, a few months or so, when would this be done, finished, if we go in one go?
Well, and I think what we heard him say is that they could begin as early as, there are actually, I think, things that can be done even before the Parkway repaving's done, but they would begin those things that from a climate
the-
standpoint they could do, they would start, and there might be a few things that would have to be done in the fall in cooler weather. I think that's what I heard you say.
It's the trees.
So let me try to bring this back to some decision points. I think the first thing they need some specific guidance on is they've come up with 2 different conceptual approaches, one of which, tell me if I'm over, but one is more grass and one is little or
Right.
no grass.
Right.
And you're recommending the moderate more grass versus the almost eliminated in entirety.
That's what I like. I
For the
agree.
circle more,
Yeah,
grass,
Right, right.
less back there.
And while I got
The
my,
rest of the parkway,
I agree.
a greater reduction.
and while I have my personal bias over my yard, I have no inclination. You've got a good team, I mean, I know the people on your team, I have no reason to try to second guess them, from my standpoint.
I agree.
What about the rest of you?
I agree. I'm not gonna
fine.
second
I
guess.
like the one with more grass too, from a public safety standpoint.
And so if we agree on that, then I think what we would be doing is telling you that on the base of narrowing in now on that point, what we would want you to do is move to the next stage, which I think is now really honing that design into, on that basis, what would that start to look like in terms of a bid package? But in the context of putting that bid package together, now beginning to address some of these questions that we're gonna need to deal with, which is, okay, under that design and this sort of package, where you're gonna look at things like, are we putting in, the 20-gallon plant, are we starting with the 5-gallon plant, are we doing these palmettos or those, that we really now start to address the questions, and we can feed them to you, the questions we need to understand. What's the impact gonna be on irrigation? Where are the areas we're gonna have to put in new irrigation versus where is our existing irrigation okay? If we're gonna have to put in a lot of money on irrigation, is there a derivation of this that will not require that? So I think from my perspective, if we can give you the guidance to which design approach, my sense is then you can start moving to a next stage of design where we can start to get some of these questions answered.
That's exactly right.
Okay?
So,
So if we just, go ahead.
are we talking about B1? Is that the one that has,
It's two separate.
So the roundabout, it's A1.
A1
and
and B2.
A1 on the circle, B on
Okay.
the other.
So
And your
did I-
proposed range was for A1 and B2, your costs that you submitted, that I forward to you all.
that's good.
Okay.
So I think what we're gonna try to do is walk our way through this in some smaller steps, but if everybody agrees with whatever they think I just said, does that give you enough guidance for the next step?
It does, absolutely.
Okay.
As long as he understands it.
Well, and
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
agree.
we know that we're on the right path, and, at least aesthetically, and once we develop more details, and that's the thing with the conceptual design is it generates a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And so we know that we're in the right ballpark, and we would develop those plans, we would look at site triangles, we would look at maintenance costs, we would look at overall construction costs. It might be that in the concept, palm tree was in a place where it doesn't end up going in the detailed drawings, things
Well,
like that.
And I do want to make sure that we understand the long-term implications of the design we're using, because what I don't want to hand off is to some new town council a year from now or 3 years from now, that they are stuck with a design which we thought looked really nice. We were driven by the aesthetic, and we thought it looked really good, but all of a sudden, they're in the same boat we are. And we have the same issue. If you go back 5 years ago when the bike path was put in, the sweetgrass, looked fantastic. That was probably one of the prettiest entryways that I've seen. But, we can see 7 years later that plant choice hasn't worked out for a variety of reasons. So we need to try to make sure we understand those things.
So I have to move in 7 years.
Unless you want to simmer.
Forget out your gardening
You're
gloves.
never allowed to leave. You're gonna be here forever. All right.
I think
Does that
we're
give
good.
you?
We don't need a vote or anything, do we?
I don't think
Just
we
give me a
do.
sense of the council.
I don't think we do.
Yeah.
But I don't want to.
Just a sense of the council, right?
Have I inaccurately
Well-
conveyed the view of the council?
No.
Yes.
Based
No.
on our agenda, yeah. I think as long as you guys have consensus that you
Okay.
support which concept, so we're good.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay.
All right. Thanks a
Very
lot.
much.
And appreciate all your
Thank
work.
you.
And Jim, I appreciate all the work of the team that you have. I see Brian's here. I didn't see,
Jen
Jen
from
or-
ARB.
from the ARB, but
And
thank
Denise.
them also. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's go to, we've only got a couple little quick things left to do. New business item B, to consider approval of the settlement agreement of the former auditors Webster Rogers. Our town attorney, Joe Wilson, if you could summarize real quickly what needs to be summarized with regard to this?
I thought it would be a good idea to point out, this is a settlement with the former auditors for the town arising from their alleged negligence in allowing some money to be removed from the town by former employees. This proposed settlement is for $50,000. This amount will, it's not the town's only recovery for this situation. The town has already recovered insurance funds and is also receiving money from the perpetrators. So this amount will bring the town close to complete recovery for what it lost. I would also point out that the town was pretty lucky in having my predecessor, Dwayne Green, work on this as part of his regular job. Usually when you have these types of settlements, there's a third coming off right off the top for attorneys, and that's not the case here. So we've negotiated this settlement. The rest of the language is pretty standard for settlements. And although it does say it's confidential at the top, there is an exception for any requirements related to FOIA, which somewhat takes up the entire confidentiality provision, but it's subject to FOIA and it's subject to being discussed in council meetings.
All right, so with that, do I have a motion to approve the settled agreement with the former auditors Webster Rogers?
Moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. The last item we have is the annual approval of the members of our several different committees, and so I'm gonna go through these quickly. I'll just take them one by one in the order that they're on the agenda here. The Arts Council is going to be deferred until February, so that they're still working out a couple issues there, but my perception, God, I cross my fingers, I hope that the Arts Council is all coming back. The Audit Committee, which is chaired by Claus, we have a recommendation to both retain Andy Capelli and Jim Williams, but also to add 2 new members to the Audit Committee, John P. Ross and Alexander Fernandez. And their bios were in material that was just presented to you. Claus, I don't know if you have any additional comments?
Nope.
Otherwise, I would ask for a motion to approve.
I so move.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in
No.
favor?
Aye.
Okay. Board of Zoning Approvals, if you recall, members of the BZA serve on a 3-year term, so the existing members whose terms are not up do not have to be reapproved. We do have 2 members, however, whose terms are coming up for renewal and have asked and assented to continue for an additional 3 years. And one of those is Wendy Kulik. Thank you, Wendy. And the other is Frank Cassidy.
Making this a far less dramatic reappointment than the last time.
And thanks for not selling your house, then you can.
Thanks.
Wow. I'm sorry, nobody watching this understands what that's all about. Anyway, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any questions, comments?
Oh, no.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Construction Board of Appeals. These members are also on a 3-year term, so we don't have any up for reappointment, but there is a recommendation to add an additional member, which there is room under the charter, Mo Mangan. And Bruce, this is a recommendation I think you're involved or making. Is that, has this committee even met this past year?
We have a meeting coming up, actually,
Okay.
so.
All right. All right. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion?
No.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Environmental Committee. I'll point out 2 things on this. This committee, of course, is an annually renewed. So all of the members on this sheet are under consideration for approval. And in addition, there is one former member who is being approved to come back to the committee. That's John Leffler. I don't know, Jim, do you have any other comments on this?
We've also added Doug Walter.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed the second, it's on my second page. And Doug Walter, who is now the KICA representative on the committee. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any comments, questions?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Planning Commission members, again, this group are appointed for 4-year terms. We have 2 members who are up for reappointment. One of those members has finished a full term. The second, John Moffett, if you recall, was appointed to the committee last year to replace Dan. So he finished out his term and is now being recommended for a full term. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Public Safety Committee, we have a recommendation to reapprove all of the existing members. And if you will recall, I think in our November or December meeting, we just recently added a member, actually
Bonnie.
2 members, Tony and Bonnie, to this. Mary Ann, do you have anything to add to this?
I'd like to know how you get the terms, how can I extend the terms? Something like
You would
Change
have
the
to
charter.
recommend changing the entire charter of the
Change the
committee.
charter.
Oh,
of
the
committee.
higher, the
Yeah,
charter.
yeah, this is part of the charter.
Okay.
And we can talk sometime, but the difference is in the committees, like planning, where there are
Uh-huh.
multi-year terms, it's because those committees are essentially driven by state law or other laws that
okay.
define the charter and nature of the term, versus these are our committees.
Okay.
Do I have a motion to approve?
I so move.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
We're almost done.
Aye.
Public Works Committee, we're recommending the continuance of all of the existing members of that committee. Do I have a motion to?
Is there a chair?
No. There is no chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
You act as the chair?
Between Stephanie
You're
and
the
I,
acting
we
chair.
act as
I'm
the
the acting chair.
chair.
Okay,
yeah.
I so move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And then I said arts and cultural events we would handle in February. And while the crowd is thinning out, I do, for the record, absolutely cannot say enough thanks to these many people here who participate their time and energy to these committees. It is an invaluable resource to have. And in fact, so many of these people, when you look at the names, they have participated in some cases for a good number of years, and the town wouldn't be able to operate without them. So I very much thank those people. And one of the things which I think at the retreat I'm going to want to talk about is increasingly I'm finding additional people in the community. In fact, one who was here a little while ago but left, who are very interested in participating and getting involved. They're looking for opportunities. And one, you hate to turn away people because we don't have additional slots and places on committees. So if anything, I want to have some conversation, I think, in our retreat about how we can find more ways to help people get involved who want
Good idea.
to do that.
I think that's really important
Yeah.
because we seem to get the same people all the time and they can only do so much, so we have
Yeah.
to expand.
And I don't want to invent stuff. I mean, I
No.
want to use people,
Right.
involve people, not just make up stuff for them to do. But there are people more and more who would like to get involved. So, all right, town administrator report.
I only have just a few things. Just to let you all know that pretty soon we're going to be kicking off the budget process time, and we'll hear more about that either at the retreat or at the Ways and Means meeting for fiscal year 21. Want to let you know that the short-term rental permit process, of course, we started January 1 with our amended ordinance. As far as I know, we haven't had any real hang-ups or hiccups. Stephanie, if you guys haven't had a chance, please go on our website. She's created a great web page that now highlights a short-term rental program, as well as we have kind of an ongoing tally at least once a month of how many permits are available in the capped area. So if anyone is ever worried or concerned about how many permits available, they can go to that website, and we have an updated tally of availability in terms of permits. So as of now, I'm pretty pleased. We had a meeting also. We have our evening code enforcement team that's out there. They're working with our new short-term rental compliance clerk, and they're finding some things out in the field at night that they're reporting to back during the day. We're going to try to, I'll get with Stephanie to roll out and advertise more with regards to our 24-hour or after hours, I should say, code enforcement numbers, telephone number. We did have an issue right after the first of the year with regards to a noise ordinance, and the person emailed us the next day. But of course, if they knew about the 24-hour or the after-hour number, they could have called right then, and we could have addressed it. So we'll do some more with regards to getting the word out there. I just want to officially welcome Joe to your official first meeting as our town administrator. I know you've already
Town
been.
attorney.
I'm
Town
sorry,
attorney.
town attorney.
Something you're not telling us?
He replaced me. Yeah, I'm taking it very well. Thank you. That's our town attorney.
So you'll work for less.
Yeah. Right. So thank you for agreeing and also for rolling up your sleeves and starting probably before January 1. And also, just to let you all know, I think Bruce is gone, but I know even with John, our planning service department, but Bruce department is going to be busy probably this year. We did, for you guys, information, we received the drawings in for the senior center. Those drawings alone are about 800 pages. So, and we have 2 plan reviewers. So we have activated our third-party reviewer who's going to help review those drawings so that we can stay on track, hopefully. And then we just received in parcel 13 site plan, that the site plan review is set for next week. So of course that's going to go through that process, and eventually the drawings will come in to start reviewing that project. So our building services for this year is going to be extremely busy with plan reviews and also inspections. So it's going to be a busy time for the town. That's it.
Okay, council member, I'll start on my left. Marianne?
Nothing.
Nothing?
I have nothing today. Nothing.
All right. Citizens' comments? Any?
Do we have executive session?
No, we have nothing in executive session.
Wendy Kulik, 38 Marsh Edge Lane. I was very disappointed when I read the Post and Courier's article about single-use plastic bans in the area, and they're touting
They
all
never
these-
mention us.
That's what I was very disappointed in. I do think that it's worth somebody contacting
It's
the
been.
Post and
it's-
Courier and
it's-
pointing it out if you haven't already
Yeah.
done so, because I think it's pitiful. But that's,
We've done it on numerous occasions. 3, because trust me, Stephanie knows every time I read that, I march into Stephanie's office and go,
well,
how
maybe
come
it's
they
time
never?
for a letter to
you
the
know,
editor
yeah,
from
yeah.
a citizen.
Yeah, we've caught it too.
It's a good idea.
Yes, since Tom's was in there today.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it bugs us too. I said it bothers us as well.
Well,
so.
it should, but anyway, the other thing, you haven't had a chance to see this yet because you've been conducting business, but I peeked at some of the updates on the Post and Courier website, and the lawsuit that the town's part of about offshore drilling, the judge ruled that the companies, the oil and gas companies, have to provide
Yeah, I saw it as
their
well.
rationale to all of the entities involved in the lawsuit, and that's good news. So thank you again for being part of that.
Okay, thank you. Any other citizens' comments? All right. With that, I think we will, okay, so do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Second.
We are adjourned, thank you. Thanks, everybody.